Hello, Brita Fordyce here, and I'm going to tie up a big flatwing today. So this is on a Gamakatsu SL12S, which is the shorter, stouter version of the standard SL12S, and it's, I think, 1X short. This one is also a heavier hook, so obviously it would suck to tie this with like a foam skater shrimp or something, just because it would end up cutting through that surface tension and end up sinking. So I'm going to start off with some bucktail, which smells like a deer's butt. I wish they didn't, but they always do for some reason. So the reason you want to do bucktail instead of other kinds of hair that you may have is because it's stiffer and it prevents the feathers from wrapping around the hook shank. On these, I generally like to hand stack them. I don't like using hair stacker for this because it makes them all choppy and even and it looks weird. So we go ahead and tie this in right where I stopped my thread, which is right by the barb. And then I'm going to take it and kind of smush it like that, so it ends up kind of wrapping them and kind of going around the hook itself. Then I'm going to wrap all the way to the front and then all the way back. And that just provides some a little bit more durability to keep them from pulling out, but it also makes it so that the body is more of an even thickness as opposed to just a chopped part and then it goes forward. So next up, I'm going to add my initial platform feather. So this feather is a standard, it's a streamer neck. So it's like a bass neck, they sometimes call them. This one's a stiffer feather than like your standard rooster feathers. And it will provide a secondary backup method to prevent the feathers from fouling after you already did the bucktail. Now you have step 2, which also prevents it. So I'm going to go ahead, and one thing you want to do is you want to peel off those fuzzy parts at the bottom. You peel those off, and then you're left with this part. And what you can do is you could take your nail and kind of flatten it if you want. These ones tend to have a thicker stem, so sometimes doing that actually makes it easier to tie it in. How I tie it in is I take it with my right hand, put it right where I stop my thread there, take my left forefinger, kind of cradle the bucktail, and my thumb on my left hand to push it down. And then I tighten on the upturn, do a couple loose wraps and then a couple tight wraps, and that is not going anywhere. Always do the pull test to make sure. You also never know if it's going to end up spinning at some point later on, unless you tie it in really, really well. You could put as much glue as you want on these things, but they're still going to spin if you didn't tie them in right. So it's always good to kind of pull on it a little bit and double check. So next up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some flash. I always add in 2 pieces of flash in between each feather. That gives it that, when it undulates in the current, it just gives it that little flash here and there as you're going. So the colors that I like best right now for this stage is going to be pearl. So here we go. Let's grab 2 pieces of pearl Flashaboo. And there you go. So I'm going to take this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually take it towards with about 1 inch left off the top, and I'm going to fold it around my thread and tie it down like that so that it adds reinforcement that this won't get pulled out. It's probably going to get eaten off before it gets pulled out, but and this little couple pieces here, the short pieces, you could find easily then and trim, so you don't have these like couple short pieces and the rest are long. So next up, I have another feather I need to find. Obviously, because it's a bait fish, you want to go from light to dark, working your way up. So let's go ahead and do a lighter blue. So this is one that I dyed myself. I love using RIT for a lot of the feathers that I'm dyeing, only because I don't need a lot of the really, really bright colors. Do as I say, not as I do, and you want to always make sure that you don't tear the feather off until you've made sure it fits and the length is right. You want it just longer than the longest feather prior to that. You don't want to end up wasting a bunch of feathers by pulling a bunch off and then finding that, like I just did, like it's not perfect. I always think I gauge it right, but I'm really terrible at that. So we're going to rip off yet another feather. And hopefully one of these will work better. Close enough. So again, I'm going to pull off those little downy bits that are hanging on there. And it leaves us with just a feather that looks like this. Now this one is a much softer feather than the last one. This is a rooster saddle feather. So I'm going to place this on top concave. So you want it to have the shiny side is up. I'm going to tie it in, doing the same thing, tightening on the upturn. And as I do it, I'm going to pull a little bit on this stem to make sure that it's seated the way it should be and it's not kicking sideways one direction or another. There you go. So that's all in there good. Now what I'm going to do is grab a color of Flashabou to add. Let's see with this one. I always end up, I have a million colors of Flashabou, obviously, but I end up still with Pearl. So we're gonna go with Pearl again. And I'm going to tie in a couple pieces of that and do the same method of tying it in. So I'm gonna grab towards the end, I'm gonna fold it over itself, I'm gonna wrap backwards towards that feather, and then there we go. So that one's tied in there. Next up, we need another feather. So I've got this really, really cool one that I gotten and then dyed over it. It's just a really funky variant kind of saddle. So I'm gonna go ahead and use this next. I don't know what fish I'm trying to replicate right now. It's just gonna be a big bait fish. And hopefully the fish aren't too picky about this, as long as it looks like a bait fish, which most of them don't care. So I'm gonna peel off those funky little fuzzy pieces. That's the feather I'm gonna go ahead and tie in now. Same method yet again. It's perfectly longer than the last one, which is exactly what we wanted. Notice how I'm leaving the stem pieces out. I'm gonna go ahead and fold those back over themselves so that that provides some additional durability and keeps them from getting chomped on and pulled out. So we've got that. Now what I'm gonna do is actually add a little bit more durability to it by adding a drop of this, the Bone Dry UV product. It soaks into the feathers and it just provides backup chomping coverage, I guess, so that it doesn't get pulled out right away by a fish. They shouldn't get pulled out. They're more likely gonna get chomped off, but depends on how toothy the critters are that you deal with. So now we need to put on another piece of Flashabou. In this case, I'm gonna go with, I don't remember what the name of this one is. It's a weird one. It's like bullfrog or something like that. It's got green, yellow, and blue. So I'm gonna take a few feathers of that, or a few feathers. Definitely not feathers, that would be Flashabou. And I'm gonna take this and fold it over that thread again, and then wrap back. Now I'm gonna take and cut off the excess folded pieces. They're already tied in, so they're not going anywhere. Okay, so that's going out the back. Don't ever cut the Flashabou until you're done, just for the record. No matter how great you are at gauging length and distance, which I'm not, it's never a good idea because you'll end up screwing it up somehow. Next up, let's go ahead and put a dark green saddle feather, and then we'll work our way towards the front. Now, the problem with this is that for people who live on the West Coast, at least in Washington, we don't have a ton of really, really big bait fish. We fished out a lot of our stuff like herring and whatnot long ago. So they don't get really big. On the East Coast, you're gonna find longer herring and bigger herring, and in the Pacific. But in like Puget Sound, for example, our sand lances are pretty short and our herring never get beyond like 4 inches, 5 inches tops. So this is gonna be a fly that would work out closer towards the Pacific or on the East Coast more so than it would Puget Sound, for example. So I'm gonna go ahead and tie this last feather in. And I'm gonna go ahead and wrap towards the eye with this, fold all of these back at once, wrap down on them, and then I'm gonna cut off the excess. And that's gonna give us that added body bulk. Now what I'm gonna do is grab some flat braid. This is just, you get diamond flat braid, Bill's body braid. There's a few other options too, but this is just the Lagarten flat braid in pearl. Pearl's probably the most universal. You could also go back in and you can color it if you want with a pen later on. So that's another option. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add in some of the squimpish hair here. And this guy, this color, I really have no idea. It's a blend. It's a really fun one. They have flash and like almost a really soft bucktail material. And I'll show you why I'm adding this in now in a second here. So what I'm gonna do is, since it's really long, I'm gonna tie it in forwards, because later on, once I'm done wrapping this material, then I'm gonna actually push it back. So I'm gonna tie this in forwards, and then I'm gonna actually also tie in a little bit of bucktail, just to give it a little bit more bulk underneath. So I'm gonna tie this in right so that it ends up stopping about an 1/8 to a 1/16 of an inch behind the eye, and just leave it forward like that. And then behind that, I'm going to tie in, I would tie in some olive bucktail, but this is the remnants after our COVID puppy decided to get a hold of it. The rest came out, obviously, at the other end of her, so I don't have olive bucktail right now, so we're going to use white bucktail again. But what I'm actually going to use is a little bit of the brown, too, in this one, because it's okay if it's a little bit more buoyant and kind of puffs up a little bit, because those brown fibers tend to be a little more water resistant, and they tend to kind of poof out a little bit more than normal. So in other scenarios, it may not be as ideal, but in this case, it doesn't really matter. So again, I'm going to hand stack that. Then I'm going to take this end and I'm going to cut it so it's even. And this is okay to be shorter, because it's just going to be a prop for this, the squimpish fibers to actually kick up on. So it doesn't need to be super long. I'm going to tie them in also forward, right there at the same point of where I tied in the squimpish hair. And I'm going to wrap all the way back over it and then all the way forward, and I'm going to stop right where I tied it in there with my thread. Okay. Now I could take my flat braid, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to wrap all the way forward. And I'm going to also wrap over the feather, the last feather I tied in, all those guys too, so that it gives it a little bit more reinforcement. I'm going to wrap all the way up to behind where I stopped my thread. And then I'm going to tie this piece off and cut it. Okay. And now what I can do is take these and push them back. So there's lots of tools you can use for this. It just depends on what you happen to have available and or what your preferences are. If I wasn't so ADD and kept my desk cleaner, I would have mine perfectly handy and ready and available to use and show you all. But apparently today is not my day. So instead I'm going to use a sort of a straw. Where is that? I have no idea. Let me try this too. All right, well, this one's too big. So I have one of these guys, and I'll go ahead and, aha, there we go. Nope, not it. Okay, screw it, I'm done. Anyways, so these actually help. There's two different sizes of them with one on each side, a different size, and this is just basically a hollow fly tool. So all I do is shove it on the front. I know McDonald's straws used to work really, really well like when they actually had straws and not like the paper things that they call straws. They work really, really well because they're a little bit fatter. So what I'm going to do is kind of guide these back with my hands, and then I'm going to wrap in front of it. I am not going to wrap over it, no matter what. And don't you either at home, okay? So this is gonna make it nice and fluffy and wanna sit upright. And you want that because you want that bulk, and that you want the bulk to be there, and you want it to be light. And so by doing it, tying it forward and pushing it back, you get the added benefit of less weight, but you also get it so that it gives it a fuller profile, okay? So it's gonna stay a little bit foofed up like this, because then once we put the eye on, then it will end up automatically pushing it back a little bit. So it looks a little bit kind of bad hairstyle situation right now until I do that. So next up, I'm going to use, oh, here's my dubbing, some dubbing to do the throat. And this I'm gonna go ahead and use the Senyo's Laser Dub in white. Pull off a pinch of that. It's the perfect length because you could hand stack this. It's about 1.5 inches long. You grab it towards the middle. I rotate my vise. And then what I do is I tie it in right there at the middle, if this would cooperate. This is where some of those tools come in handy, the weird ones. You would never catch me buying these for a person ever at a store, but I will buy them for fly tying. So there you go. Now I've got a clip on there. All right, so now I've got this. I'm gonna tie this in right here at the throat, behind the eye. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna simply take the rest of it that was forward, push it back, tie down, rotate it again, and there we go. Now, this guy is done short of the eyes. So I'm gonna go ahead and whip finish here. You could put on peacock curl if you want at this stage. I don't have any handy, so I'm not going to, but normally I would. There you go. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and push that back, and then I'm gonna find some eyes. So let me quick grab some eyes and I shall be right back. Okay, so I've got some of these guys. They're the fish skull living eyes. These are 5mm, I believe. I'm gonna put one of them on, and I'm going to hit it with my UV stuff. This is the Loon Thin. Personally, I think all of them are fairly similar. I'm not super picky about them as long as they hold stuff in. Everyone who knows me knows that the light, I'm a huge fan of the light. The light makes a massive amount of difference. So this is the Infinity light, and that's definitely the one you want. It is what will make or break your entire tying experience with this. I've bought every light known to man prior to getting this, and I cannot tell you what a difference it makes having a good UV light. You will end up wasting so much time and money without one. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit that again. There you go. And then after this sets, what I'll do is I'll go through and I'll hit it with the Sally Hansen's or similar, some of the hardest nails, some of their clear nail polish, so that it ends up with that a little bit of added durability for the head. So this guy is all done. He's about, I don't know, 5 inches long or so. And this would work great just about anywhere. It would work great for stripers. It would work great for bass. It would work great for pike. I would use it for Dorado and things like that, depending if I was in Baja. I would throw this for small roosters, lots of options. And even salmon out in saltwater would hit this too. So that's about it. Thanks for watching.